That person would be the Lord of the Vampanese and had to be obeyed by every member of the clan. If they accepted this lord, they'd gain more power than they'd ever imagined. Otherwise, they'd be destroyed. The promise of such power proved too much for Steve to ignore. He decided to take the test. He probably figured he had nothing to lose. He entered the coffin, the flames engulfed him, and a minute later he stepped out unburned. Suddenly, everything changed. He had an army of Vampanese at his command, willing to give their lives for him and do anything he asked. He no longer had to settle for killing Mr. Crepsley. He could wipe out the entire vampire clan. But Mr. Tiny didn't want the Vampanese to crush the vampires too easily. He thrives on suffering and conflict. A quick, assured victory wouldn't provide him with enough entertainment. So he gave the vampires a get-out clause. 3 of them had the ability to kill the Vampanese lord before he came fully into his powers. They'd have 4 chances. If they were successful and killed him, the vampires would win the War of the Scars. That's what the battle between the vampires and Vampanese was known as. If they failed, 2 would die during the hunt, while the 3rd would survive to witness the downfall of the clan. Mr. Crepsley was one of the hunters. A vampire prince, Vansha March, was another. The last was also a prince, the youngest ever, a half-vampire called Darren Shan. And that's where I come in. I was Steve's best friend when we were kids. We went to the Cirque du Freak together, and through Steve I learned of the existence of vampires and was sucked into their world. I was blooded by Mr. Crepsley and served as his assistant. Under his guidance, I studied the ways of vampires and travelled to Vampire Mountain. There I undertook my trials of initiation, and failed. Fearing death, I fled, but during my escape I uncovered a plot to destroy the clan. Later I exposed it, and as a reward I was not only accepted into the fold, but made a vampire prince. After 6 years in Vampire Mountain, Mr. Tiny set me on the trail of the Lord of the Vampanese, along with Mr. Crepsley and Vansha. One of Mr. Tiny's little people travelled with us. His name was Harkat Mulds. Little people are grey-skinned, stitched together, short, with large green eyes, no nose, and ears sewn beneath the flesh of their heads. They're created from the remains of dead people. Harkat didn't know who he used to be, but we later found out he was Curtis Smalt in his previous life, the vampire who'd betrayed the clan in the hope of preventing the War of the Scars. Not knowing who the Vampanese lord was, we missed our first chance to kill him when Vansha let him escape, because he was under the protection of Vansha's Vampanese brother, Gannon Harst. Later, in the city of Mr. Crepsley's youth, I ran into Steve again. He told me he was a Vampanese hunter, and fool that I was, I believed him. The others did too, although Mr. Crepsley was suspicious. He sensed something wrong, but I convinced him to grant Steve the benefit of the doubt. I've made some terrible mistakes in my life, but that was certainly the worst. When Steve revealed his true colours, we fought, and twice we had the power to kill him. The first time we let him live because he wanted to trade his life for Debbie Hemlock's, my human girlfriend. The second time, Mr. Crepsley fought Steve, Gannon Harst, and an impostor, who was pretending to be the Lord of the Vampanese. Mr. Crepsley killed the impostor, but then was knocked into a pit of stakes by Steve. He could have taken Steve down with him, but let him live so that Gannon and the other Vampanese would spare the lives of his friends. It was only afterward that Steve revealed the truth about himself and made the bitter loss of Mr. Crepsley all the more unbearable. There was a long gap between that and our next encounter. I went with Harkat to find out the truth about his past, to a waste world full of monsters and mutants, which we later discovered was Earth in the future. Upon my return, I spent a couple of years travelling with the Cirque du Freak, waiting for Destiny, or Des Tiny, to pit Steve and me together again for one final clash. Our paths finally crossed in our old hometown. I'd returned with the Cirque du Freak. It was strange revisiting the past, walking the streets of the town.